Good to see you all, and welcome to the second week of the Stewardship 2021 Spring Forum. I'm so excited to see your faces on the screen and your names in the participant box. Last week was incredible. I felt inspired, I felt connected, I felt reinvigorated about the work that we're doing individually and the work that we do together. For those of you I don't know, I'm Sean Johnson. I'm with the University of Montana. I'm also co-chair of the National Network for Landscape Conservation and a proud steering committee member of the California Landscape Stewardship Network. Today, I get to wear the hat and serve as the co-chair of the Collaborative Leadership Roundtable with Dr. Amy Mickle from California State University, Sacramento. One statement from last week that continues to resonate with me is this thought that it's not a matter of if we know enough, it's a matter of, are we going to do enough? And as I think about what it's going to take to get hard things done, I think about the shifts that are needed in the way we work. Focus not just on the outcomes we seek, but also on the culture we want to foster and facilitate. That takes investing in people and process, not just better information. And that investment in people and process is a large focus of today's session. Today's all about collaborative leadership, the behaviors, attributes, skills, abilities, the intelligence and wisdom that enable and advance the success of landscape scale conservation and stewardship efforts. Over the past 14 months, the Collaborative Leadership Roundtable, made up of the 10 incredibly inspiring, creative, and passionate individuals on the screen in front of you, has explored how we can work together to better understand and advance these principles and practices of collaborative leadership, with the goal of increasing the pace, the scale, the effectiveness, and the inclusiveness of our landscape stewardship activities. Our intent in building the program is to help you succeed in the challenging and very rewarding work of collaborating at scale. We've coined our effort Collaborating Well, and we're excited to introduce that to you later today. Not only are we excited to share our thoughts with you, we're excited to hear from you. And so as we get started, I invite you to reflect on your own experiences working in partnership with others. And I invite you to think especially about the people you've worked with who are inspiring, who are empowering, who are effective collaborative leaders. Then I invite you to think about, what is it that makes them stand out? What is that quality or characteristic that you see in them? And then finally, I invite you to jump over to Poll Everywhere, where a link is going to magically appear in the chat box, and share your response there. So in short, from your experience, what is a key attribute or quality of someone who collaborates effectively? Someone who you consider to be an effective collaborative leader. And as soon as those start coming in, we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the key attributes and characteristics that you've seen in your work or that you've seen in others. Already seeing a lot coming in, so you guys are getting really good at these tech tools. So they're good listeners, they're empathetic, they're curious, they demonstrate integrity, they're friendly, caring, and competent, they're engaging, they're authentic, they go deep, there's a willingness to engage and to trust. They have ability and they're able to really energize the room. They're active listeners. Wow, you guys have really filled this up. They're competent. They excel with authentic ability and listening and caring, and they're good facilitators. And that is the coolest word cloud I've ever seen. So fantastic work. Keep those coming. And I would just say that, from our perspective, we've done the same exercise for ourselves and found it to be super helpful as we think about how is it that we want to see ourselves show up in this work, and how is it that we would like others to show up. And I'm really glad and heartened to see that your thoughts are very similar to our own. Indeed, when we started the roundtable, we started by asking ourselves the very same question. And from there, we asked ourselves, what can we do to help more people acquire and exhibit these qualities? What are the skills that we can identify and build? And how can we turn that into an engaging curriculum and an engaging program? So on the screen in front of you, you'll see flipping through some flip chart notes from our time together of all these different collaborative skills that we think are super interesting and helpful and instructive, and that we're excited to turn into a collaborative leadership program. As we've been building out these specific elements, we've also been developing an overarching framework. First, we think that strengthening collaborative leadership skills begins by connecting people to their own journeys. We're all in different places, have different experiences, different strengths, and different needs. Speaks to fit and relevance. Second, we think that we all need a better and deeper understanding of the collaborative process. We simply need to have a shared vocabulary and a shared mindset. Third, we think investing in ourselves across 4 key dimensions can facilitate meaningful and lasting change. These include developing an interconnected worldview, enhancing your interpersonal skill set, creating a sense of belonging, and facilitating the collaborative process. Finally, we're convinced that these are deep skills that are learned and acquired over time, and we're committed to investing in people throughout their learning journeys by offering ongoing coaching and mentoring opportunities, by facilitating peer-to-peer learning, and offering tailored and advanced trainings. We also know that we can't create a meaningful program without your input, and we're so excited to have you be a part of our conversation today and connect with you on this process and on this journey. A little bit of a roadmap for today before I turn it over to today's speakers. First, going to start with my friend and colleague, Chandni Navalka, who's going to share a little bit about the intersections between collaborative leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then we've got a fantastic panel lined up of collaborative leaders who will share their insights and lessons with us from the work that they've been doing at the landscape scale. After that, our Roundtable leadership team, our collaborative leadership roundtable, will introduce our Collaborating Well program. Then we'll take a break and come back and do that working session, working with you to advance our thinking around these key dimensions. And then we're excited to have Armando Quintero, the director of California State Parks and a member of our roundtable, conclude today's program. So with that, I'm excited to have you meet Chandni Navalka if you haven't met her yet. Chandni is Associate Director of Sustainably Managed Land and Water Resources at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, where she works on projects to advance and accelerate the enduring protection of land and water resources worldwide. I've asked Chandni, who serves on this roundtable and the DEI roundtable, to help us bring those intersections forward as we walk through today's agenda. Chandni, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Sean, and thanks so much, and welcome everyone. I'm really looking forward to spending this time today thinking together with you all about how we can access and develop our collective capacity to engage in meaningful and sustained relationships and partnerships, and really to create shared agency in shaping the future of our communities and landscapes. Before we jump in, as Sean mentioned, I wanted just to offer a few reflections on the intersections between collaborative leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion from my roles in both roundtables during this forum. And as Sean said earlier, the process and practice of collaborative leadership starts with connecting people to their own journeys and lived experiences, and in sharing those experiences with each other. All of us who came together as part of this collaborative leadership effort brought different perspectives and backgrounds to thinking about what it would take to enable the landscape stewardship community to collaborate more effectively. And as many of you have likely noted, and within our roundtable itself, partnership-based work at the landscape scale is often not fully or meaningfully representative of the diversity of histories, experiences, knowledge, and wisdom present in our places or at the scale at which we work. And the Collaborative Leadership Roundtable group, recognizing this, and particularly those of us who came to this rooted in different cultures or with histories working with different communities, have begun to build into the collaborative leadership program the importance of bringing awareness to and centering the values and principles of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in collaborative processes. And really to ask ourselves, how can collaborative leadership help the landscape stewardship community of practice to counteract the structures, the biases, the assumptions that hold us back from including and engaging in a sustained way with a broader range of voices and imaginations in our collaboration and partnerships. Our intention, and we hope to work with you all to center this intention, is to deliberately center diversity, equity, and inclusion principles in each of the 4 dimensions of collaborative leadership that Sean shared earlier, and which we'll discuss and hear more about later in this session. We're hoping to design a program in a way that addresses the transformations that need to happen and which equip people to show up and to help others show up in partnerships courageously, whether as allies, advocates, or activists. And we want to recognize that this is a practice of constant learning and growing, and we ourselves are learning from the people who bring the expertise, the understanding, and ability to engage in and elevate dialogue and discussion, such as the folks involved in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Roundtable. And you'll hear from Roundtable co-lead Shelana and my colleague Yakthar later today to help us go deeper. So to wrap up, I wanted just to bring you back and invite you to look at the mycelium map, which each of you has received with your Spring Forum materials. And I think this map is really powerful because it brings attention to the need for the inquiry and transformation that's part of diversity, equity, and inclusion work to happen at 2 levels, the individual and the collective level, whether the collective level means our organizations or our networks, to advance landscape stewardship work through stronger collaboration. And this is a practice that is interconnected between this session, collaborative leadership, and the sessions to come on systems change, biodiversity, and shaping the future of landscape stewardship to meet the needs of this moment and beyond. So thank you for the opportunity just to lay the groundwork there and for being here today to think with us about this. And Sean, back to you to take us forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Johnny, for articulating those intersections and inviting everyone to really show up with intention and curiosity and those principles that are really behind the work that we're trying to foster with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And thanks to that roundtable for offering the mycelium map. I'm thrilled to start our programming today with the voices of your peers, leaders in collaborative landscape scale stewardship and conservation, who are helping create a more hopeful future for their focal communities and landscapes. And I'm delighted to introduce you to the panel's moderator, Lisa Brush. Lisa has been a leading collaborative conservation leader, she's been leading, collaborative conservation initiatives in the environmental sector for over 2 decades. And in her role as CEO and founder of the award-winning Stewardship Network, she's engaged literally thousands of professionals and volunteers in identifying community and conservation needs and determining strategic support that she and her network can provide. Lisa and panelists, thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom with us today. Lisa?
Thanks, Sean. Hi, all. Great to be with you again today. I'm looking forward to this time of talking a little bit more about collaborative leadership and hearing from your peers. Sean and Shani, you all laid the framework for this panel. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to hear from diverse landscape stewardship practitioners, so your peers, about their experience in the collaborative process and gain kind of their insights and wisdom into what makes this work well, what do we need, what are the strengths, and just how do we continue to advance a collaborative approach. And kind of as we lay the framework for sharing with you this panel, this collaborative leadership program that we are going to be telling you a little bit more about throughout today. So what we're going to do is the panelists will have a brief period of just 10 seconds to introduce themselves, and then we will have a series of short moderated 10-minute long discussions with each person. Mind you, we could have an hours-long conversation with each one of these people. So we're going to kind of keep track of time. Apologies for the interruptions to keep us moving along and being able to hear all of the stories, but looking forward to hearing from each one of you all. So with that, I think we're going to bring our panelists up. And will you all say a brief hello and what your affiliation and your focal landscape is?
Sure, Lisa, I'll start. This is Kass Bissmeyer with the National Park Service. I'm in the Biological Resource Division for our agency. And I lead a community of practice called Connected Conservation, or the NPS. We focus on land and seascape scale conservation. I'm also a part of the Network for Landscape Conservation and participate in the California Landscape Stewardship Network as well.
Thanks. And Shelana?
Hi, everybody. I'm Shelana deSilva. I'm the co-chair for the California Network's DEI Roundtable, along with my friend and colleague, Jose Gonzalez. I've been working for more than 10 years on intersectional approaches for conservation and public lands policy and California-based restoration and land stewardship projects, and a long-term commitment to decolonize our work. I'm really happy to be here with all of you.
Thanks, Shelana. And Greg?
Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Moore, and I am the CEO Emeritus of the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. My entire career has been involved with national parks and public lands in the US and around the globe, and I'm really happy to be here with you all today.
Great, thanks. And Eugenio?
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this group. I'm Eugenio Rengifo. I'm the Executive Director of Amigos de los Parques Corporation, from an NGO that works to build a culture of national parks in Chile. I served before as professor of public policy and also as a local development leader in different places here in Patagonia. So I'm very happy to be here and share with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sarah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Wells, and I coordinate a partnership in Massachusetts called the North Quabbin Regional Landscape Partnership. And I've been with them for a little over 10 years now, starting as an AmeriCorps member. And I'm glad to be infiltrating this California network.
Great, thanks. And gotta love the technology, right? Coast to coast across the US and down into the Chilean Patagonia, and low carbon footprint to bring you all these people together today. So thank you all for being part of this panel. So Kass, we're gonna start with you. I'm gonna try to keep track of time, as are my colleagues in this, and you and I get to model and the rest of the panel how to do this in 10 minutes, the nearly impossible task. So Kass, you've been involved in a whole number of efforts that you described, the National Park Service's Connected Conservation Community, and a leadership role for the National Network for Landscape Conservation, like you mentioned. And through those efforts, you've gained a lot of insights from landscape initiatives across the country. So as we get started in this conversation, I'd like you to focus on the role and the value of the strong kind of interpersonal skill set and how we communicate with, and it was said in that word cloud, right? So what are those things to build effective relationships with one another? So to that end, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the relationship building elements of the collaborative efforts that you've been involved in. What's working well, what are the areas for improvement, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, Lisa, I think to start, relationship building is so much more than just pulling the right people together at the table. It's so much more than just having the partners involved. It has to be focused on getting to know the people that are involved. So it's not just pulling the people together. It's that desire to want to know the people, and finding ways after you know the people that you can work well together. It really comes down to, in my experience, having that trust, the accountability to one another, learning one another's interests and passions at that very local level, exploring different organizational and cultural dynamics and styles. And I think more often than not, it also comes down to our desire to be generous with our own contributions or our own time, putting our best foot forward and being motivated in that. From my experience with the National Park Service, I think what's working well with our Connected Conservation Group, and I can, most closely talk to this, I kind of narrowed it down to about 3 things. Our team has been very good at making space, again, to get to know one another. We have done this in a number of ways, whether it's, just having fun in our conversations or brainstorming about different topics and ideas, having one-on-one so that we could really learn about our backgrounds and what we can bring to the table. Similar to things that the California Landscape Stewardship Network has done, or the Network for Landscape Conservation, we hosted a series of mini interviews with our folks who were at the table, and that really helped to just kind of break down barriers and hear from one another on a very local level. What is really your interest here? What do you really get out of participating in this? And I think from my perspective as a coordinator, I could really see where we could align even better. Having those voices isolated and common language being used. The other thing that comes out of making that space to get to know one another is it allows a collaborative to be proactive in a time of crisis or opportunity, right? It enables us to quickly come together and be able to be productive. You know, I think of those team dynamics where you go through those phases of storming and forming and norming and performing. You know, I think having those collaboratives in place where you really know your people, you can jump to that performing stage very quickly, especially in time of crisis or opportunity. You know, the second thing that I think works really well is having a motivated, strong leader or leaders with really strong interpersonal skills. So the things that you all were plugging into that word cloud, it's really critical, you know, having that leader who can kind of keep you together and keep you moving in the same direction, being able to have that sort of constant drumbeat of communication of around, you know, your shared vision as a group, as well as, you know, I kind of almost want this in the lessons learned a little bit, but acknowledging that the administrative function of keeping a group together is really, really critical. You know, and that comes from a strong leader, but it may also be, you know, having additional people involved who can help with that administrative function. And it's simple things. It's like, does everyone have the correct calendar on their, you know, invite on their calendars? Does everyone have the correct access to the notes? You know, what are those little blocks that really prevent people from staying engaged and seeing the collaboration as a benefit to them and what they can offer. And then the third thing I'll mention, I know we're going to talk a little bit about this, but in this panel later, but really leaning in or embracing diversity. And that includes diversity of skills, people, ideas, concepts. I often say with C2, which is our connected conservation group, that our strength is diversity. We are a very interdisciplinary group that cuts across our entire service of 20,000 employees. And the benefit of our group coming together is that we have all these different backgrounds and skills, whether it's people who are working in the national heritage areas and therefore cultural resources, or people who are working in wildlife corridors specifically, or in rehabbing culverts so that they're safe for species to cross. We have this huge strength in our diversity and at all levels, you know, and I think a major benefit there is that we all try to come to the table at an equal playing level. Doesn't matter if there's a superintendent at the table alongside, you know, a park resource staff or a regional, you know, staff person. I mean, it really has been something that has worked very, very well for us, is this leaning in and embracing that diversity. And if it's okay, I'll just switch gears and jump right into my thoughts on how we can improve. Kind of narrowed this down to three places too. One place that I think a lot of collaboratives oftentimes will get stuck is that they're not sure of what their place or their role is. And I'll use an example of a colleague who I talked to yesterday about this. She had brought up that she's on this feral swine task force. And it's frustrating because this feral swine task force is built of, you know, people from across different agencies and within the US, and they're a very high level group. And I said to her, you know, well, what's your role? What do you guys see your role as? She's like, well, we just really want to make a difference on the ground. And we want to put money on the ground into these projects. And I said, well, you got to think about it. You're at the very, very national level. Maybe your role is something different. Maybe it's providing communication resources or trainings or, you know, something to that effect. And so I think that's a place where we can all really improve, is being very, you know, assured of what our place is and what our role is. You may not be able to be that collaborative that can actually make that big difference on the ground by, you know, putting money into it, but maybe you have those communication skills that you can provide some trainings or some, you know, something at a different level. The second thing where I think we can really improve is going back to that administrative function. I think it's far more necessary for successful collaboratives than we think. I mean, we see that clearly with even this group. There's such a strong administrative assistance with Devin and Michaela and even Sharon, you know, like I think that's really a critical function that we overlook. And it's really key to success. And again, just a place where I think we can all improve and support more. And then the last thing I'll say, opportunities where we can improve, is building empathy and not egos. So going into collaboratives with that mindset that this isn't about me, this isn't about an individual, this isn't about me gaining anything out of it. It's us putting our empathy hat and really thinking about what that means and how we as a collective can be stronger together and make a difference together.
That's great, Kass. Way to boil that down into lots of really great insights. And one of the things that I've always said is, that it's, sometimes we'll talk about, oh, we're like-minded. I'm like, well, you don't know if we're like-minded. I say we're like-purposed in this moment. And so having the diversity of opinion is really important. I also think the other thing that we talk about too is we say there are no such thing as experts. So they're just people with varying degrees of experience. So you may be the superintendent and have decades of experience and sitting right there with a person who's 3 weeks in and you have different levels of experience. There's no divide that way. So Kass, thank you. One of the things that we also kind of acknowledged in this, and I don't think we necessarily have time for it, is that there's not necessarily, as Sean said in the intro, there's not a Q&A session here, so there might not be time for a lot of interaction. But Kass, thank you. That was really helpful. And I think what I'd like to do now is move on to Greg and Eugenio. And I'd like the two of you to connect the previous conversation on relationship building. And we've brought the two of you together to talk about your relationship and developing that interconnected worldview, where you two have connected through an international peer exchange program facilitated through the International Landscape Conservation Network. And you all have been exploring other dimensions of collaborative landscape scale work. And you two built this effective relationship. And now you've been able to go much further than that because of the solid relationship. And in particular, you've moved into a different way of working and thinking that represents this interconnected worldview that we talk about over and over and over again in Collaborating Well. And you've developed an effective and enduring partnership that guides the future development and conservation of Chilean Patagonia. So now we get to model the how do you do this with two people in 10 minutes. But moving on, Greg, I want to start with you. So what factors contributed to your collaboration with Eugenio, working together as two leaders of conservation-based nonprofits supporting national parks in different hemispheres?
Well, it's great to tear off Kass's comments because the factors that contribute to individuals working together are common to the factors that work for institutions working together. And I would say for Eugenio and I, what made our collaboration work is three things. First of all, we shared a common vision, and that vision was that landscape stewardship really depended upon a deepening of public awareness, engagement, advocacy, and support of public lands. We really believed in the democracy of public lands and the power of inclusion and advocacy. Secondly, we were traveling down a common path. We were both at a point in our life, the first leader of a nonprofit organization based in partnerships. My path began 3 decades ago when the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy was founded. And Eugenio's path began, I think, about 2 years ago when he became the first leader of the new organization, Amigos de los Parques, for the Patagonia National Park. So we could immediately identify with each other's opportunities and challenges. And finally, we had a common leadership approach. When you begin with only 2 people, or in my case, 3, you are aware that your impact totally depends on reaching out and engaging others. That you have to build concentric circles of individual supporters, institutional supporters, government supporters, and from there you can build out because you'll get an economy of scale through the collective partnerships that you developed. And finally, and I think we all know this, but it's not referred to often, there's really the personal dimension. Personal chemistry is important. How you listen, how you support, how you lead, how you're humble, how you're motivating, but also inclusive. All those factors are critical to the relationship. And with Eugenio, it's been a true gift for me to get to know such a dynamic, committed conservation leader.
Great, thanks, Greg. And Eugenio, it's been very fun for me to get to know you. And I would say that kind of dynamic, connected conservation leader is very true. It's really been my honor to meet you through this process. So Eugenio, let me turn to you and ask you, when you met Greg, and I want to join your club of the person who started something and with one person and built it from there. It is a club of people who know that entrepreneurial world. What was Greg kind of able to offer you to your leadership and sense of possibility, right? So you're several years in, whereas Greg's couple more years down the line than you. What kind of things was he able to offer you?
Well, first of all, as Greg says, we had a real good connection. And it's because I think Greg, it's been so generous and he was always open to realize what's going on with the others. I think he have a special approach that is not common in the leaders of different areas, you know. So first of all, a personal connection, very strong, I think. You can feel that his vibes are with you. I mean, like, he's exciting about what's going on in Chile, and we share the values and the way how to move in the world, you know, how to do things. It's not just where are you wanted to get, but how you get there, you know. So I think we share the same values. We have a common vision, and Greg has walked the path that we are starting. So as he says, he's 3 decades, 30 years above me. So it's very, I don't know if it is the right word in English, and sorry for my English, but it's very useful for us to have this experience so close and open to what we're facing during these early days of the National Parks Friends Group in Chile. So I think Greg it's been a very important partner, but more than partner, a kind of mentor, by sharing his experience and also his network. He's always active to listen and seeing how to connect with others. We've had many different projects or challenges where Greg put all his network in order to provide knowledge and opportunity to do the right things. For example, the Park Ranger School, and he connect with all the people from National Park Service, or many different experience where Greg has been so generous to put all the knowledge accumulated by Golden Gate Conservancy and himself in order to give a sort of ground for Amigos. You know, we are just starting here. We have beautiful parks in our Patagonia, but we don't have a proper National Park Service. We don't have the culture. We don't have the budget. So we have beautiful challenges to face, and we need good friends to do it.
Yeah, that's great. It's so invaluable to have somebody that you connect with like that, who's kind of walked the path that you are walking now, and be able to share it so generously. It sounds like, you know, one of the other things I want maybe each one of you to touch on briefly, and Greg, maybe we'll start with you, is what might you tell other folks in terms of who are interested in a peer exchange model, or maybe a collaborative leadership approach? You know, Eugenio, as you said, Greg's approach is very different from other leaders that you've come across, and so what might you share there?
I would just share, I think we all probably have a common experience, either in our education or in our profession, where someone took us under their wing and helped guide us and provide advice and mentorship. And those people stand out in your life as people that made a difference in your sense of possibilities and your own personal accomplishments, and having just someone trusted and confidential to rely upon. So I think with Eugenio and I, we have this is key to collaboration, a tremendous reservoir of trust that built up in a very quick time. And that allows for complete openness and looking at possibilities together. So that's one reflection.
That's great, thank you. And Eugenio, anything from your perspective?
Yes, I think to do this partnership works, it's very necessary to have a deep interest, genuine interest, truth interest in knowing the other organizational culture and the way of learning, and to build a relationship where no one imposed their way of doing things, but they share the mistakes, and maybe you find the 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 valuable thing is to learn about the mistakes of the other. So if you have an open relationship to build a path together, building by confidence, empathy, you will succeed. It's not possible to do this kind of relationship by I don't know, like in India, kissing the feet of the guru, you know, like just putting the your mind and yourself under the other one. But how to build together, it's the way we will succeed. I think this is the key point, the key element to build a good partnership. Like, really, I don't know how you says in English, but we says like put ourselves in your shoes, or understand how you walk, or you know, it's empathy. Like, really be open to dispose this knowledge, and be kind with the different waves. That's why I think it's remarkable from Greg. He's not teaching us, but he's asking a lot and listening a lot, and by his own questions, I think we learn more than by big stories about how he have done before, you know. So I think this is a very important way to see the key of success of this relationship.
That's great. Thank you both for your model of friendship and learning and sharing and leadership and mentoring, and Eugenio, to your point, it's a true peer exchange. It's not Greg sitting on high and saying this is what I've done, but really listening and being open to your journey and sharing some of the pitfalls that he's approached. So thank you both.
Lisa, one quick observation, and I'll conclude. I'm really impressed just a half hour into this meeting, how much we see now that the stewardship of landscapes really is about the stewardship of relationships. And it's a key shift in the paradigm that's happened. And
fabulous
to be here for that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Right. It's the people that's what we need to get better at, is the people part. Yeah. So great. Thank you. And thanks for sharing that. Shelana, let's turn to you now. And again, kind of thinking about the interpersonal relationships, the collaboration, and the cross-boundary work that folks are doing. And you've been helping our community think about some of the broader issues that we're facing, especially related with issues of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how they intersect and inform with our work, very much so. And Greg, you maybe just pointed to that. It's the stewardship of relationships and the stewardship of landscapes that we need. And I think, as you said, 43 minutes into this, and we are hitting on this over and over again. As these conversations proceed in our work with the intersectionality of them, what are you seeing in the way that these important conversations are playing out? And what do those insights and experience suggest that we consider as we engage more and more people about in our collaborative landscape stewardship efforts and DEI? So as you lead conversations in this space, what are you seeing? How are people reacting? How are they being open? How are they closing up? What do you see as the opportunity as we gauge more diverse people in this work?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And I'm just so inspired by my fellow panelists and looking forward to hearing from Sarah too. It's an honor to be in this space with all of you. I mean, clearly we are working through another inflection point in this country, right, around systemic racism. And we're seeing a lot of focus today on equity and inclusion in our sector in the conservation space related to racism outdoors, equitable public access, who we hire, who serves on our boards. We're all hearing this call, right, for intersectional environmentalism, which is a phrase attributed to Leah Thomas that demands an environmental movement that advocates for both people and the planet. And that's all really exciting. And there's hard stuff happening too, right? The admonishing truth that the conservation movement is still very white. Our senior staff of color are often frustrated, feeling exploited or pushed out. It can be a lot to take. There's a lot to sort of take in for leaders in this space. And sometimes I think it's hard to know where to begin within the context of an organization or within the context of partnerships and collaboratives as well. And I'm seeing in the face of all of that, some hard questions being asked and some bright spots of change happening. I mean, for the first time in this country, we have a Native American leader heading up the Department of the Interior, right? She's in charge of all of our public lands, and how incredible is that? So I do see that there are elements of hopefulness and change that are happening that we need to collect those like seashells and kind of hold on to them as we move forward in this work. I mean, and you asked too, Lisa, you know, what do we consider in the face of all of that? And there's a lot to consider, right? I mean, the issues around equity and justice, as we all know, are really complex and nuanced, and they touch down not only in conservation planning, but as we've been talking about with this panel, interpersonal relationships. It's a lot. And I would just suggest that, you know, thinking about conservation planning or biodiversity conservation with an intentionally intersectional lens is an attempt to align those conservation priorities of a particular organization or a network with the social justice goals of relevant communities. In some places that might mean repatriating land. In other places it might mean funding a network of partners with mutual goals to build community connection in a healthy watershed, for example, or to build a playground that adds to the patchwork of urban biodiversity. You know, I think there are often inherent tensions between conservation goals and land rights goals, for example. Regionally, we've seen this discussed in a recent Bay Nature article about the challenges of repatriating land to our regional tribes. And then I don't know if any of you caught the Atlantic article recently that was written by a Native American leader saying that all of the public lands should be returned to the tribes. You know, I think collaborative leadership in particular is critical to promote the conditions required to shift power, to shift our focus and our resources in the way we want them to go to answer some of the priorities that were written about in those pieces.
Thanks, Shelana. And you know, I also think that one of the things that's just so important in this for us in our work around it. Thanks. I was hoping somebody would drop that in. There's the Atlantic article in the
Thank
chat
you.
there. Yeah. And I think that the idea for people that this is really our responsibility. It's a moment that is there for us every single day, and we really need to seize it and to have these conversations. And I think that one of the things that, you know, we saw in the word cloud and that we're seeing in all of the great insights that you as panelists are sharing with us is that idea of authenticity and trust and openness and listening. And so that if it hasn't been your lived experience, you should listen and not and understand in terms of that realm around that. Shelana, anything else that you're hearing when you're in those spaces and having these conversations that are kind of insightful around collaboration with this?
Yeah, Lisa. I mean, I think one of the things that I struggle with and I see colleagues struggling with too is again, going back to that idea of where to begin, because this touches down in so many different aspects of our work. So I want to just really point to the mycelium map that was developed by the Network's DEI Roundtable, because it represents sort of the powerful and emergent nature of social change that can be catalyzed when individuals look for inspiration in addressing these big challenges. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I guess fundamentally, I want to say that there can be joy in this work, searching for justice and equity. You know, so that's a good thing for us to remember, that connection and expanded horizons await us in this. You know, and I think another a thing that I might suggest for all of us to consider is more affinity spaces in which people can be safe to explore ideas, share stories about the inevitable missteps, and hear from their peers about how the commitment to advancing justice and equity is going for them. And I'm thinking specifically about like executive staff, right? Where the practice of and actually the space to practice collaborative leadership can transform our conservation movement, because in many cases they still hold the keys, and there has to be room for people to share and develop goals and hold each other accountable.
Yeah, that's great. The idea of what power would you give up? What's a different lens through which you would view power? And the other thing that I often talk about is when those conversations are hard, if you can hold on to all of those things we dropped into the word cloud and that you all are talking about here, and understand it might just be a hard conversation, and be comfortable being uncomfortable and practice in that space. And that is a muscle that you can exercise and you can become much better at.
Yeah,
So Shelana,
exactly.
yep. Keep going.
Well, I just wanted to say, I hope that we can all at an individual level sort of find time to work with each other on this work. And by this work, I'm specifically talking about equity, because we work in professional associations and a number of issues in our work, right? And this is one where I think we can be there for each other a little bit more as we do the other important aspects of our trade, because I think that's what will help us move from awareness to action.
That's great. Thanks, Shelana. Really appreciate those insights. And again, like I said at the beginning, we could be having hours-long conversations on, well, these should be decades-long conversations on each one of these things. And so, and Doug, just to point out, Doug says in the chat, it'd be great to walk through the mycelium map together. And maybe we can drop that in. We did talk a little bit about it last time, and my guess is the DEI group is going to talk a little bit more about it today, because it's a pretty cool thing that they developed. So Sarah, I want to turn to you now. And a different, you know, you're on the East Coast here, and you've been advancing a number of similar partnerships across New England. And in that role, you've been able to look at and across multiple efforts to gain insights in what's needed to design, right? So that's an important piece, is how is it set up, design, structure, and facilitate these collaborative efforts. So from that vantage, what are you seeing, both in terms of lessons learned, but kind of more importantly, in moving us towards our collaborating well curriculum development process? What are you seeing in terms of the skills and abilities that are needed to be an effective leader? And, you know, how are people gaining that training, and what happens when they don't have that? So any insights that you have on that?
Great, thanks, Lisa. But first, I just have to say, I mean, there have been some really profound and poetic things that have been said so far in this panel that I really appreciate. And I got goosebumps a couple of times when Shelana was just talking in particular. So thank you all. Great. So Lisa, I really appreciate the framing of your question and the focus on design, structure, and facilitation, because I do think that the scale of the collaborative work really affects the approach to those different components. So I wanted to focus on the two scales in particular that I'm involved in that involve external partners, because I think those are the times when things can get really interesting, when it's working outside of the land trust, for example, where I work. So there's the scale of my individual regional conservation partnership, which I'll call an RCP. That's our term in the Northeast. I coordinate that in Massachusetts. And then there's a much larger scale that encompasses New England and parts of New York, where I'm on a steering committee for what we call the RCP network. This RCP network, the reason that we exist is because we're trying to increase the pace and the scale of conservation in New England. And we rally around this vision called the Wildlands and Woodlands vision. That's pretty ambitious. It's protecting upwards of 70% of our landscape in New England. And in order to do that, we have to triple the pace of conservation that we have now. So I really have zero doubt that the only way that we're going to be able to get there is through collaboration. So the conversations that we're having today are incredibly relevant to that work. On the smaller scale, the individual RCP that I'm involved with, we do a lot of multi-landowner projects and landowner outreach. And we partner primarily with municipal partners, state agencies, other land trusts, and a couple of key academic institutions. So that's just a bit of the lay of the land before I think about those three components that you mentioned at the top, Lisa, with design, structure, and facilitation. So when I'm thinking about the term design, to me, that's about the why. And there's this phrase that Bill Labick, who coordinates the New England-wide RCP network, he uses this phrase called catalyzing function. And I love that. And I also have to say that I'm beginning to realize that Bill Labick is probably the Sharon Farrell of the Northeast in his brilliance and bringing people together. But this phrase, catalyzing function, I mean, that's what it boils down to, right? I mean, why this particular group of people coming together? What's the point? What are you able to do together that you're not able to do individually on your own? And I found that if your partners don't have a clear or shared sense of what that is, your partnership is off to a rocky start and might get stuck. At the New England-wide level, getting buy-in around that shared vision of wildlands and woodlands has been really important, because from there, the design is about building a shared sense of urgency and how we work together to actually implement that vision. Moving to that second piece about structure, I think of that as the how. So when I'm working with my individual RCP and we're doing a multi-landowner project, how are we actually functioning as a group? How are we making decisions? Who's making decisions? How often are we talking with each other? How are we sharing power? How are we having, to Kass's point earlier, the importance of having a really clear coordinator, someone who can help move things forward in the agreed upon direction and make sure that there's accountability in that process as well. At the New England-wide level, I think it can be a little trickier because the network is more diffuse. So right now, for example, there are more than 40 regional conservation partnerships that are in New England and New York who are under this umbrella of the RCP model. So I think it becomes incredibly important to make sure that partners know where the access points are. So how do we disseminate information? How do we communicate with each other? How do we share stories about what's working and what's not working? And we've invested a lot of time and energy into building those communication structures. We have a publication called an RCP handbook. We have websites. We have annual gatherings. We do workshops. We've done some peer exchange mentoring programs, and all of those have been incredibly helpful. And we also put some focus on individual coordinators to make sure that they have support in their efforts. The final piece of the facilitation, it reminds me of the words that we just saw in the word map, because to me it really boils down to trust and respect. So with my individual RCP, I'm trying to make sure first and foremost that I'm respecting the time of my partners, that we're sharing credit, that we're celebrating the success. And someone mentioned this earlier, but the importance of finding and savoring those moments of joy when this work can be hard and projects can take a long time. And similarly, on the New England level, there's finding those points of synergy and making connections and trying to build momentum, sustain momentum, but also in cultivating leadership throughout the entire RCP network. And although we have a coordinator, it's not about concentrating power in that individual, but in all of us as a whole. And just moving toward the end here, you had asked Lisa also about skills and training, and I genuinely believe that the topic selection is entirely dependent on the partners at the table and what they need and what they can share. But the two things I have learned for sure are that the real growth and development, it's not linear, and it shouldn't be top down, because there's so much experience and wisdom that can be amplified from within our partnerships and not necessarily from the ones that have been around the longest, from new partners. And I also thinking about the perspectives that are missing and why, and who we can invite into that shared space to try to develop what training means. And then finally, I just wanted to share just quickly about why I love collaborations in general. I think collaboratives, they're such a flexible tool where we don't have to apply rigid thinking. We can change the status quo if something's not working. We can redefine what success looks like, and we can make room for intangible outcomes, like building trust and making sure that people feel heard, and the sense of belonging that Jose mentioned last week that are so critical. And on a personal note, something that's been very transformative for me is understanding the ebb and flow that goes with collaborative work, and giving myself permission to realize that as much as I love my partnership, we are not going to be all things for all people all of the time, and that's okay. So thank you. Speaking of collaborative work, we're putting together a big grant right now, and a partner just waited patiently outside my window for 5 minutes to give me a letter of support. So I'm not sure I respected his time very well in that particular moment. But.
That's awesome. Well, in these days of the multitasking that we do, right? I was in a meeting this morning where the person who was facilitating it, 7th grade son, had band practice in the next room, and so I actually just love the insights that we all get into each other's lives and what we do outside of that. So thank you all so much. I mean, sharing you all, I have to tell you that I didn't design this panel. I didn't know all of you in the way that I know you now. And when I got to know you, I was like, this is going to be, wow, I am really looking forward to this panel. So, and you all just completely spoke to everything that the Collaborating Well Roundtable has kind of brought forward. So I thank you for your insights. And kind of as we wrap up here, and again, also really appreciate that this is, again, the kind of thing where we could get together for days and carry on these conversations. So really appreciate you all sharing your brief insights in that. And just to wrap up this panel, what I'd like to do is just to ask you if you have any kind of final thought or insight in just 30 to 60 seconds, and we'll start in the order that that we went. So Kass, Bissmeyer, any final thoughts that you have?
You know, I've been thinking about this, Lisa, and I think, you know, one capacity that I think we miss often is if you're coming at a collaborative from the right like headspace and your heart's truly in it, my take home would be to trust your gut. And I know that's kind of simple or simplifying it, but I think often we kind of forget about our intuition. And oftentimes if you're in a challenge within your collaborative, really just listen to your intuition. It usually ends up resolving a lot of issues or challenges, or creates more space for opportunity. So my one thing is trust your gut.
That's great. Thanks, Kass. And it's really interesting because that makes me think, you said it's kind of simple. There's the whole piece of everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten kind of piece. There's a part of this that is really simple and foundational. And yes, then it's complex beyond belief, but it's also both things. So thank you. Greg Moore, your 30 to 60 second insight.
Yeah, I want to thank Shelana for reminding us that hard work, difficult conversations, and uncomfortable change are in the service to a joyful vision and outcome. That's always a good thing to know, and also to realize that really justice is fundamental to this, because justice produces equity. Equity means everyone benefits equally, and when everyone benefits equally, that's sustainable. That's something that everyone will hold on to and move into the future. So just a reminder of the importance of justice in our work.
Thanks, Greg. And yeah, really having that as foundational. Eugenio Rengifo, your final 30 second insight.
Well, after listening all these beautiful co-panelists, I think that collaboration is a real space of freedom, like a source of creativity, a space where you can think outside of your organization and understand how others see you, and what is missing, what part of the puzzle are you missing, and that is possible only from the deep trust, and that's how you connect these personal skills with professional skills in this beautiful way that Greg described before.
Great. Thank you, Eugenio. And Shelana deSilva, your final 30 to 60 second insight.
Yeah, thanks. I'm loving these insights from our panelists. I would just encourage us all, myself included, to encourage, cultivate some vulnerability. It can be really hard, but it's actually very rare that one of your colleagues is just coming for you, right, to topple you. That's typically not what's happening. So if you're getting feedback, you know, be open to it, and this goes back to some of the principles that we saw in this word cloud, right? Deep listening. In order to really deeply listen, you need to cultivate vulnerability, and it's hard. We can work on it. We can do hard things.
Right, and we can model that, right? That's when you model that, it pays off. Thank you. Sarah Wells, your final 30 to 60 second insight.
When I was thinking about this question, I was a little stuck on how easy I think it can be, especially over the past year, to get very tight in our thinking about what's in our immediate sphere of influence. What do we have control over? What do we have to do on our to-do list today to move our projects forward? And what a gift it can be to give to ourselves, and through that to the relationships we have with our partners, to step back and take a deep breath, remember why we do this work, why we're connected to these places we're trying to conserve and the people we're working with, and how that relates to work on scales that are bigger than what we're thinking about on our to-do list, but that it matters. And that everywhere across the country and across the globe, there are people who, like you said in the talk, Lisa, have shared purpose. And that's a pretty incredible community to be a part of.
I really think so too. And I think what we are sitting on the precipice of in terms of the stewardship of relationships and the stewardship of our ecosystems and the change that we can make and the change that's needed in our society right now. I think you all spoke to that beautifully, and I really appreciate you taking the time and also the chance to get to know you better. So thank you so much for the work that you do and sharing who you are with us today. So thank you so much. And with that, Sean, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa and panelists. That was super inspiring. It's just so great to hear your insights and have you share your experiences with us. And it makes me feel really committed to doing the work of this Collaborative Leadership Roundtable, which is all about how do we help you do even more, do it even faster, with more urgency, with more effectiveness, with more empathy, to really bring forward the knowledge and skills that can help you be effective. And you guys have spoken to what those keys to success look like, and we really just want to amplify those and share those with more people. So thank you so much. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to my friend and co-chair of the Collaborative Leadership Roundtable, Dr. Amy Mickle, who's going to introduce us to the work that we as the Roundtable have been doing to develop a collaborative leadership training program. So Amy's a professor of management in the College of Business at California State University, Sacramento, and she's served the state of California as a consultant and researcher for 20 years. She's committed to helping partnerships invested in landscape scale stewardship, management, and conservation through her research on collaboration and partnership impact. Hi, Amy. It's so good to see you.
Great to see you, Sean, and thank you to the panelists and Lisa. That was fantastic and actually really validating for what we've been working on. Kind of emphasizing that we've moved from, I don't think there's a question around why we should collaborate. We know all the benefits. We are creating that creative space, et cetera. It allows us to be more flexible, but just the how and how to do it really well. And so that's been the central focus of this roundtable's work, has been to design curriculum that will enhance individuals' abilities and capacities to be able to collaborate well. And we want to set people up for success in their collaborative work. And so really one of our main objectives for today is we really want to seek guidance from you, those engaged in collaborative work, as we develop our program. As briefly mentioned before, we are a group of 10 in the roundtable, and we've identified 4 dimensions as core to our collaborative leadership program. The first one is developing an interconnected worldview. The second is enhancing your interpersonal skill set. The third is creating a sense of belonging. And the fourth is facilitating the collaborative process. And my collaborating well colleagues are going to go into each dimension in a little more detail. And so I'm going to start us off. To start us off, I'd like to introduce and welcome Dylan Skybrook and Devin Landry, and they're going to be describing the first dimension, developing an interconnected worldview. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy. And thanks to our wonderful panelists and for all of you joining us. Really excited to kick us off here in the first dimension. And, Dylan, developing an interconnected worldview, I'm reminded of the first time that we met. It was in 2019 at a network convening in Fish Camp in Yosemite. And, over breakfast, you and I both discovered that we were really animated about this topic of collaborative leadership. And I had just come, relatively fresh out of a graduate program in collaborative conservation. And I had come to see all these different needs for collaborative leadership, right? We have to navigate wicked problems. We have to bring diverse perspectives together to find common ground. We can even, employ it to spark a greater sense of civic engagement, across this country and across the globe. And that's in regards to how lands, waters, wildlife are managed, you name it. So in this kind of heady conversation we were having, you offered something that struck me in this really elegant and simple way, right? You told me that you're drawn to this work of collaboration because it acknowledges a world that's interconnected, and it sees a reality where things are far more interrelated than they are separated from each other. And the Collaborating Well initiative sees this thinking as so foundational that we're introducing our 4 dimensions with this topic leading off. So for those of us who joined us last week, Dylan introduced aspects of this thinking in his remarks, and I would love for you to just take this time to build upon it, right? The more that we see connections in ecosystem function that really defines a landscape, how can our work mimic that sort of interconnectedness by embracing it in how we do our work, how we think about it, and how we practice it?
Yeah, thanks, Devin. My name is Dylan Skybrook, and I manage the Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network. And I'm going to talk about one of the 4 dimensions of our collaborative leadership curriculum, which is developing an interconnected worldview. And first, I'll just start off by saying, man, I loved that panel. So good, so inspiring. So thanks to all the panelists. It's really fantastic. Developing an interconnected worldview is a way of understanding how the world works. Instead of only seeing separate things, you start to see relationships and connections and networks and so on. And I thought this was really mirrored in Greg's thought about how stewarding landscapes is about stewarding relationships. It's like all those things are connected, right? Developing an interconnected worldview is a kind of overall framework for understanding how all those things relate to one another. For example, here in California, in the wake of increasing wildfires, there's a lot of fuel reduction work, in many cases being done by people on this call. There's getting rid of understory brush, the thinning of forests, creating fuel breaks. But people aren't just thinking about their own land. Networks of land stewardship organizations are thinking together about what they can do across a region. And then people who live in forested areas are lobbying public agencies to put in fuel breaks and so on land that is adjacent to theirs. And this is all because everybody understands that the forest is connected, that land is connected, and that in that context, actions that you do are meaningful because of the interconnectedness, that they're going to affect other people. You can't just do the work on your own property and then feel safe, because if your neighbors haven't also done that kind of fuel reduction work, you're still vulnerable to catastrophic wildfire. So everybody sees that some things are connected. Like, this is not, an idea that's alien to us, right? If you work in land management, that fire example is probably pretty obvious. But the point of developing an interconnected worldview is to become sensitized to it to a greater degree, to take that logic to conclusion and see that interconnectedness is a fundamental quality of the world, and that attending to those things, stewarding the relationships, stewarding the landscapes and so on, is what we need to be doing. I think this recognition really changes how likely we are to collaborate. It allows us to see collaboration as an absolute necessity. The tools we use to understand interconnectedness these days are systems thinking, complexity science, network theory, and so on. But obviously this is not a new idea. You can see this understanding of connectedness, that the world is interconnected, in indigenous worldviews and non-dual spiritual practices, and even to some degree the common sense that we all share. I think anything that helps us recognize, again, become sensitized to this interconnectedness, that we are all affected by one another, is really valuable. When we develop an interconnected worldview, a few things happen. One is that if we recognize that things are interconnected, collaboration will be more effective than going it alone, since we can see that we don't have control over some of the things that will affect us, just like the neighbors advocating for fuel reduction work on properties that are next to theirs. Another thing is that when we start to see relationships and connections of all kinds, and not just separate, apparently separate things, one of the things that we will see is that the quality of the relationships greatly affects the outcomes. And in the context of collaboration, that means developing interpersonal skills, which is another dimension of the collaborative leadership curriculum. And then another thing is that as you start to see relationships, you might start to see what's missing, what's not connected. This kind of goes to that catalyzing function idea that Sarah talked about. You know, for systems to work, all the relevant pieces have to be connected together for everything to function and work together. So what's not there? For instance, you might try to get a public utility that doesn't really see itself as a land manager, but actually is, into the room to be a part of the collaborative conversations. Or you or your organization might think more about taking a more equitable and inclusive approach to make sure that people who have regularly been left out, have been disconnected, have a seat at the table and are part of the conversation. And this is another dimension of our curriculum, creating a sense of belonging. Finally, when you start to focus on relationships and connections, you'll notice that many factors might commingle to produce an outcome. And you get a different sense of cause and effect. You'll notice that things are not always linear, that the simple answer is not always the right one. Things are a little bit more complex or ambiguous than you might presume. And this is a useful thing to understand about the world, but it's also useful interpersonally, that you can then have a little bit more tolerance for ambiguity as you start to go through those collaborative processes with your partners. So that's the intro for today. This is a topic that really benefits from more time spent. But that's what we have today. And you'll see some of these ideas next week in the Systems Change Day for the Spring Forum. So thanks. And next up are Amy Mickle and Sharon Farrell, who will be talking about enhancing your interpersonal skill set.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Dylan and Devin. So enhancing your interpersonal skill set, how to act with intention, empathy, courage, and humility to foster effective collaborative relationships. I have had the great pleasure of conducting research around this topic. Particularly, I did research on partnership impact and focusing on one TAM, which is located in Marin, California. And one of the things that I found in that particular research study, which was a 4-year longitudinal study, was what you all are saying is that what is foundational to this work and to be truly effective and to achieve the desired outcomes that your partnerships and networks are hoping to achieve, which is working together and across agencies, partners, communities, and boundaries. The key to it is are those social connections and trust. And so in this model that I was co-developed called the Partnership Impact Model, trust and connectivity emerged as foundational, that those had to be there to be able to move into creating those other outcomes and impacts that all of you are intending to do. So building those healthy relationships requires solid interpersonal skills, which we've been talking quite a bit about. And in a more recent study that I conducted, we found that there were 4 cornerstones that related behaviors emerged as key to effectively engaging in collaborative leadership. So we have the first cornerstone, which was compassion. And I love that all of you, all of these actually have already been highlighted in our word cloud and re-emphasized by our panelists. But compassion is it's about having empathy. It's about being generous. It's about showing respect, which a number of you have already commented how important that is. The second cornerstone that emerged was character. Having people act ethically, demonstrating humility, and staying positive for those, joyful celebrations. The third cornerstone that emerged in this research was courage. That means the courage to be vocal, not just sit back and not say anything. The courage to display curiosity, to model vulnerability, to embrace uncertainty, to stay resilient, and to empower others. And the fourth cornerstone is commitment, advancing a shared vision, taking action, and believing in that power of collaboration. And so it warms my heart to see that the themes that emerged in this research project are also ones that were noted on the word cloud and that again have been highlighted by our panelists and in the conversations that we continue to have. I'm going to invite my colleague Sharon here to talk a little bit more about examples where she's seen individuals display these types of behaviors or inequalities and what the outcomes have been with that. Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks, Dylan and Devin. And as a practitioner and network leader, I have been the beneficiary of this research and other emerging social science and case studies. As part of my work, I think a lot about how do you put it into practice, right? And then how do you adapt that based upon the learnings that you undertake? And for me, understanding the collaborative leadership traits that Amy, you've just shared so quickly and eloquently, and knowing how to use those to cultivate a collaborative mindset is critical when facilitating how we achieve collective goals and actions to achieve partnership impact. And as you shared that you asked me to, if I could reflect on a couple of examples of behaviors where those behaviors have fostered positive impact and strengthened partnerships, and those that perhaps are a little less desirable and yielded challenges and obstacles in partnership health. So let's start with the behaviors that create obstacles. As some of you know, I facilitate a land stewardship network in Marin County, WANTAM, and during its formation, leaders came together to craft our partnership's governance structure, its funding model, and the anticipated roles. During those early conversations, 2 partners struggled with focusing on the collective purpose and not necessarily their individual interests. And so what happened was it created tension. And this happens often with the formation of partnerships. And it manifested itself in multiple ways for WANTAM. One organization threatened to leave the partnership if their specific projects were not prioritized and that their prioritization process had to be used. Others expected that in any money that we raised, it should be divided solely on the merits of the size of the land that was managed, which not surprisingly, the organization who was promoting that had the most land. So neither of them came into the discussion with a collaborative mindset, and one struggled to share power and control. So after each partner affirmed their interest and commitment to working together, we worked through these issues. And perhaps one of the most galvanizing moments in that was when the leader of the third partner offered that he would invest his funding, his time, and his staffing to support the priorities on other lands if they were the regional priorities, not just his priorities. And he shifted that conversation from me to we. 8 years later, it has taken collaborative leaders to grow and sustain WANTAM. One leader in particular, Max Corton, who's the director of Marin County Parks and Open Space, continues to exemplify collaborative behaviors, specifically courage and commitment. Max has become an internal and external champion for WANTAM. He inspires confidence in donors and elected officials. He's willing to sit down with groups who have concerns, invite unlikely partners into discussions, and demonstrate vulnerability and humility. Recently, he demonstrated commitment through being the first to invest his agency's resources into our regional vegetation map, our LIDAR work, and our sea level rise projects. Through that, he inspired other agency investments to leverage private funds at a multi-million-dollar scale. Similarly, Max models vulnerability, creativity, and uncertainty to his staff, his fellow executives, and community groups as WANTAM is exploring equity and inclusivity practices as a partnership. So I guess, Amy, in closing, what I find has been most helpful in applying the research associated with the Collaborative Cornerstones framework is having tangible ways to talk about collaborative behaviors, right?
Mhm.
This has been invaluable. It's a way in which we can discuss these topics with new partners as they come into our network. We can develop and provide trainings around this and bring forward intention in an often undervalued part of partnership work. Specifically, we've learned that enhancing interpersonal skills is not just about using soft skills, it's about building essential skills, those that are absolutely necessary to cultivate and sustain a thriving social infrastructure, which I believe is the necessary muscle needed to sustain partnerships. So that's how I'm using it, and that's what I've seen, Amy.
Great, thank you, Sharon. And I just want to say also understanding what behaviors discourage collaboration is something that's also really important for us to reflect on. Yeah, great, thank you. So we have our next duo, and they are going to be talking about creating a sense of belonging. We have Yakata Punawala and Chani Navalka. Thank you, ladies, for joining us, and you're up. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy and Sharon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yakata Punawala, and I'm with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. And if you were to ask me, when did I start doing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work? My answer would be from the time I was born. There's a really wonderful civil rights lawyer, Valerie Kaur, who recently started the Revolutionary Love Project. And she says that we birth the beloved community by becoming the beloved community. And so when I think about our journeys, our collaborative journeys, the fate of our world, it really just depends on how we create these communities by addressing systemic racism, by addressing the systems of oppression that we're witnessing and really co-rising together. And while I'm really happy to be here with you, I also wanted to let you know that both Chandni and we're carrying a lot of fear, anxiety, and grief right now because of the absolutely heartbreaking, horrifying COVID situation in India, where both our family and friends are. We're mobilizing resources, we're coordinating calls. And so I shared this really to model the spaces we need to create, right? For that culture change to happen, for that mindset that needs to shift, that we need to see not just happening at the intellectual level, but at the emotional level, at the heart level. And how do we create these spaces, whole spaces for what is really emerging in this interconnected world and interconnected worldview that we're holding space for. Yesterday, we have a collaborating well message group chat. And yesterday, everyone in that group reached out to Chandni and myself, like, hey, we've got you covered. Let us know how we can step in. This is what creates a sense of belonging. This is what created a sense of belonging for Chandni and myself. And so the group chat was really modeling that compassion and empathy that I'm hearing throughout our conversations this morning in collaborative work. And justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work is not a linear path, like Dylan said. It's an imperfect journey. It's a lot of emotional labor. And so we're so used to having those linear, perfect paths. And how do we change that? How do we listen to all the social reformers that we've had in the past who've told us over and over again that change begins? The entry point for change is really when we feel that fear, when we have that courage to speak up, when we feel that despair and anger and frustration, and when we start channeling these emotions, we can consciously, fundamentally, and radically shift ourselves, our institutions, the systems around us, the ways we see or don't see each other, the ways we listen or don't listen to each other. And that is when that shift happens, and we can start fully growing our capacities for an equitable and just world. So I'll start with that, and I'll invite Chandni to share a few thoughts, and then we have a few questions for each other.
Thanks, Yakata, and thank you for just making that space and allowing us to bring our vulnerability and be honest about where we're coming from today as we think about what leading with values means in this curriculum. And if I'm honest about where I'm coming from today, I feel really nourished by the opportunity to be in this space of turning our collective intelligence towards collaboration and partnership, because to me, never more than in this moment has it been so clear that collaboration is how we're going to survive. And we need to be equipped and empowered to build the relationships that sustain us. And as our friends and colleagues are sustaining us, and as we're seeing people sustain each other in India at this time. And Adrienne Marie Brown, the author of Emergent Strategy, describes collaboration as survival. And I'm feeling it so viscerally and personally, maybe for the first time today. And I also feel full of questions. And my journey in this group, it seems to me that questions like, why am I here? And Kass pointed towards this, right? Why am I here? What do I have to offer? What do I need? And what am I willing to give up? These questions are the core component of creating a sense of belonging too. And leading with values, I think, is really about making space for people to reflect on and share these questions that I think we're all bursting with. And to bring, I would say, to bring to our partnership-based work what everyone is carrying in the fullness of their histories and their lived experiences and their imaginations. And I'm going to point again to the mycelium map, and I know that not all of you have that, so maybe it can be posted in the chat again, and the individual inquiry guide. And as those documents map out, this individual or inward work is connected to the collective work of centering justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's being comfortable with holding these questions and mobilizing these questions to strengthen our work together and enable us to work with each other more effectively, and effectively by working with each other at a deeper level through trust and respect and learning and being open to the possibility of being transformed by others. So with those preliminary thoughts, what we thought we'd do is move into just a conversation where Yaksa and I kind of share with you all how we think about some of the key questions that are part of this dimension of this work. All right, Yaksa, I think you're asking me the first question.
So Chandni, what are some early cultural influences that have shaped how you think about collaborations and partnerships?
You know, I would say that there have been so many influences in really thinking back to childhood, but, you know, coming from the place now where what I think most about is facilitating knowledge exchange and peer learning, my influences have come from such different places as the culture of my parents based in India, which is really focused on family and community and collective good. And also the educational influences that I've had, which happened through my kind of going through an education in Quaker community, which really emphasizes working collaboratively and making decisions through consensus in a way that, you know, I think is unique. So I would say those experiences have really brought me to this work. And I might ask you the same question.
Yeah, and what you shared, Chandni, really makes me think about how culture really shapes us and how we see the world and how we show up in collaborations and partnerships. And those cultures can be supportive or they can be oppressive by nature based on our histories and our traditions and our backgrounds. And I am often reminded of when I started thinking about collaboration, in the community that I grew up in, we were sent to a school where we had to learn to eat collectively because there was this giant plate. If you've been to an Ethiopian restaurant where 4 or 5 people sit, 8 people would sit around a giant plate. The food would be kept in the center, and then you had to take it to your side with your hands and eat in a way that you're not making it uncomfortable for the person sitting next to you. And we had to go back home and take our own little plates and practice. And when I think about the mycelium map and the individual inquiry questions, that's where collaboration and DEI work interconnect, where you have to go back home and do your work, whether it's learning how to eat effectively, in my case, in my community, because then I would have to go back and sit around with 7 people and make sure that I didn't take too many resources, and make sure that there's enough food for everyone. And that was such a strong example for me right from the beginning of what it means to collaborate, to share resources, to treat each other with respect. And I think each one of us in the Collaborating Well are doing that too, right? We're looking at where we're coming from. We're creating space for each other. We're asking the hard questions of who's not in our Collaborating Well. I think about this room and I'm thinking, who's not here? We clearly haven't reached any goals. There's no goal, it's just that journey. And so who's not here? And we're looking at documents on dismantling racism. We're looking at documents written by Tema Okun, I think, about this white supremacy culture. And so that's the culture change that we're seeing, and that's the culture change that we all need to be part of.
So Yakuza, I want to ask you, what are some challenges that you'd like to highlight in doing this diversity, equity, and inclusion work in collaborative leadership and in collaborations?
Thanks, Chandni. So many challenges, which many of you have already addressed. And I think some of the big challenges that really stand out for me right now is that DEI work is not a bucket list agenda item that you just check off the list and it's done, right? For us to radically change our approach, this work needs to happen at multiple levels. We need to secure funding. We need to have staff who do this work. I often hear that Black, Indigenous, and people of color folks are the ones doing the DEI work. How does that change? How does that shift from not just our BIPOC folks doing the work to everyone in leadership doing the work, right? There's assumptions, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's fear of failure, of saying something that's not politically correct. There's fear by leadership, there's fear of losing power. And I say, like, we're not losing anything, we're gaining by sharing a lot of that, right? We're talking about shared power, we're talking about shared values. So I think those are some of the big ones that stand out for me right now. And I hope we can continue this conversation about what are the challenges, and hearing from folks, if we can populate the Padlet and really hear from folks, what are some of the other challenges that folks are seeing?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure if we have time, but I have one question for Chandni.
How are we doing on time?
Go for it.
Okay.
Chandni, I love the work that you do at the international level, and it's just so inspiring. So if you could share an example of collaborative leadership work that stood out for you, that's unique from what you're not seeing happening here.
Well, I guess I wouldn't say that it's unique. And I think I might kind of turn your question to my own desire to highlight something, which is to talk a little bit about how the process of collaborative leadership is really, in some ways, about moments that really stand out in terms of seeing what leading with values looks like. And I want to talk about the international experience that actually Greg Moore and Eugenio Rengifo were part of in the peer learning exchange that I helped to coordinate through my work with the International Land Conservation Network. And I was thinking, do I give a big example or do I give a little example? And I think the little example is more powerful. And during that exchange, there was just a moment where we were sitting in a conference room, and without planning, just to start us off, one of the folks who was our host played a piece of music. And it was a very cheesy piece of music, in my opinion, but everybody in the room listened, and some people closed their eyes, took a moment, and it was just a few moments, but when we returned from that, I felt that there was a new openness with each other, and it was a moment of multi-directional generosity, and that's a word that's come up a few times here, that literally made us listen to each other differently and rippled out. So I know that it's not unique to that experience of working internationally, and I just think that international scale work illustrates that collaboration can happen at all scales. But what I really wanted to highlight is that leading with values is just this constant practice of creating those moments of generosity and trust, and also deliberately raising awareness around who is participating, and what are the critical voices that are not included, so that we understand how to share power and agency. So thank you for allowing us to go over time, everybody. I think we did a little bit. And Jakob and I could go on asking each other questions for this whole time. So we will now open this conversation up to others, but first we will transition to inviting Lisa and Sean to talk about the fourth dimension, facilitating the collaborative process.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jakob and Johnny. Really appreciate the way you brought forward that conversation and the dialogue that you facilitated between yourselves. It was just so authentic, and hearts are with you and your families right now. So thanks for spending the time with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for taking the time. I think it's really important. And as Sean said, you know, thoughts and hearts to all of your families and support, and let us know what we can do, right? As Cliff dropped into the chat, you know, we are all connected, and this proves it even more. So Sean and I want to talk to you a little bit about facilitating the collaborative process and what it means to facilitate, and the what's at the heart of it all. So, hey, Sean.
Hey, Lisa, how are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good, good, thanks.
Yeah. Hey, do you spend much time in meetings?
Meetings, fair bit, a lot maybe. And no, all the time actually. Yeah, and it's only gotten worse during the pandemic. So yeah, lots of times in meetings.
So when you're in that time, how well is it designed and facilitated? So are you spending that time building deeper relationships? Are you sharing critical knowledge and skills and insights? Are you making important decisions? Do you know what your role is? Are you advancing partnership efforts? Are you fostering a fun, creative atmosphere where all voices are heard and relationships are built? Is that the way you're spending your time?
Not always, maybe, hardly ever. No, seriously, it varies widely. I've been lucky to be a part of some amazing experiences and meetings. And then honestly, sometimes I'm better off multitasking. But it's not just meetings. You know, I spend 80–90% of my day interacting with colleagues, with partners, and with every interaction, I'm thinking about those dimensions that you've just talked about. How am I engaging in a way that builds those deeper relationships, that helps me transfer knowledge in an effective way, that really helps facilitate progress, helps us support one another, make the decisions that we need to do, and build the culture that we want. So I feel like there's a lot of learning that I've done through both facilitating and participating in meetings. And it's really about this larger process that really evolves and advances in so many different ways. In fact, one of the images I try to keep in mind is that of a kaleidoscope. It's made up of all the same components. So you've got the same people, the same issues, but it's continually shifting and evolving, and it appears in new and sometimes unpredictable and sometimes awe-inspiring ways.
Yeah, it's great that you are spending some of your time in those, and you create those spaces, and that's what we really want to talk about, because when people are part of that, and especially it's really cool when they're part of those kind of spaces for the first time. Oh, it's just transformative. It's so powerful. So our focus for this dimension of collaborating well, in terms of facilitating it all, is to help us design and facilitate shared experiences that are meaningful, productive, engaging, and fun. So, you know, we need to create spaces and experiences that bring people together, that help us achieve our goal of accomplishing more together than we can alone. We've talked about this for the last few hours. And in the context of landscape stewardship, we have to think about this way that spans cultures, organizations, sectors, jurisdictions. And how do we reach that goal?
Great question, Lisa. $1 million question in some ways, but I think part of the answers emerged from the panel. And I think it was Kass who said, if we aren't really paying attention to this facilitation, coordination, administrative backbone support role, we're really missing an opportunity to support and empower our team and ourselves. And so for me, a lot of the answer for this dimension of collaborative leadership is focusing on both the art and the science of facilitation. And by the science of facilitation, I just mean this is the stuff we read about. This is the stuff that we learn about for group processes and the forming, storming, norming, performing framework that was introduced earlier, the tools, the techniques, the decision rules, the partnership agreements, building all the knowledge and skills that we have around process management and how it is, what it is and how it works. It's really about building that toolbox. And then everything else I put in that art of facilitation side of things that we talked about so often today. How it's the stuff we intuit and that we feel based on our own personality and experience. It's our emotional intelligence. It's our ability to communicate and empathize with one another. It's our ability to navigate tensions in difficult situations by really building in inquiry and thinking about conflict, not as a opposing viewpoint, but an opportunity to really learn more about someone else. It's helping foster and inspire a culture that reflects the aspirations and personalities of everyone in the partnership. And certainly we can't do this alone or in a vacuum. Facilitators and coordinators need and benefit from connecting to others, peers, mentors, coaches. That powerful story between Greg and Eugenio about just the power of mentorship and what that brings forward in the work. There's also the need to tailor this work to each place, to each partnership. This is not something that's a one size fits all. This is something that's really nuanced and really reflective of the people in the group. And the last thing I'll say, this isn't just for coordinators and facilitators. Everyone benefits by having a deeper understanding of the facilitative skill set when it comes to collaborative process and collaborative leadership. And in fact, if it's the facilitator and coordinator who's doing all the work, that's not always a good signal and might invite a conversation about the importance of everyone contributing and collaborating together. Finally, it's just an ongoing journey. We learn this by doing and reflecting and iterating forward. It's a practice that we're all part of our own journey, and it takes continual learning and investment.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. As Sharon dropped into the chat, the science of facilitation. Yes, there's a science, and honestly, so many of us learn it while doing. So there's that piece of taking what our piece is about is really taking that time to learn the skill, and then as Yagata said, go back home and do the work and practice it and come back and have mentorship around that. So it is the science of it. There are tools and techniques and tactics, and then it's the personal, ongoing, lifelong journey of it. But Sean, anything else you want to share about facilitating the collaborative process with this audience?
Lisa, I would. Just a couple of things in closing here. This is something that we know can be learned. This isn't something that's, really opaque or hard to understand, but it takes time and it takes effort. And in fact, it's a lifetime of practice. Every day and every facilitation experience offers new opportunities to learn and advance your skill set. And not only that, it's transformative. Sometimes we think about the mechanics of collaboration as being very transactional and getting the work done. That's part of it, but it facilitates transformation in the people that we work with and the landscapes that we steward. And we've seen how when it's done well, people are energized, they're inspired, they love opportunities to experience life together through sharing their experiences in a well-designed and facilitated forum. And finally, the last thing I would say is have fun and make it your own. And I want to give a shout out to everyone who's noticing that I'm wearing plaid on plaid today. That's exactly one of the things that I try to do is just bring in these little quirky elements to bring in some personality to the work. And for some reason, I've always worn plaid to California Network convenings. It may be because plaid is the only thing that's in my closet, but who knows, maybe it's something else. So that's it. And really glad to spend some time introducing this dimension with you, Lisa, and invite others to join us this afternoon when we get to our breakout discussions. That was fun. A lot of fantastic conversation happening in our room, and really anxious to hear what the conversations in other rooms surfaced as well. And so much of this was fun to just reflect back on the conversation we've been having throughout the course of today on all these different dynamics and intersections. And based on the conversation we had in our room, I'm guessing the same in yours, you're seeing that these dimensions are really critical to explore, but they're all connected to each other too. And we were very intentional about calling them dimensions because we saw that those were things that would be interwoven and not standalone items. So I'm anxious to hear from each of the groups, and I know we don't have a ton of time, so let's jump right in. And I'm just going to go by room number And I understand that Becky Rittenberg was the volunteer for room number 1. So Becky, thank you so much for raising your hand, and go ahead and share the conversation from your small group.
Sure. So we were talking about interconnected worldviews, and we talked about what kinds of info, skills, or training do we wish that we had to develop that interconnected worldview. And some of the pieces that came out of that were facilitation skills, like less traditional facilitation skills, to build connection. So you can take some of this abstract thinking and build some concrete strategies for actually facilitating a conversation. We talked about learning more skills around the power of questions and sort of cognitive coaching, how to provide really good questions that prompts inquiry, wonder, and awe, rather than just statements. We talked about exposure and having more forums like this within communities to kind of widen the pie for partnerships, thinking about what toolkits members could take back to their collaboratives to help build these conversations and partnerships, to move away just from the intention that a partnership, a multi-stakeholder partnership could happen, to actually building it. Talked about ideas and tips for how to expand the pie to public health to get more allies on board. And then we talked a little bit about network leadership principles in two. So like, how do you move out of just your organizational growth model and into network growth? How do you kind of move that worldview to be thinking about the collective, and where there might be transferable principles from environmental education and the Beatles project model in that as well. The last thing was in that conversation too was a toolkit for thinking about social media campaigns, of how to craft messages to be shared publicly as we think about that interconnected worldview, and expanding into outer circles to bring more into partnership. The other piece we talked about is like, in thinking about the curriculum, what would help us most. We talked about how to build content in ways that address multiple learning styles. So what might something look like as a lecture and a case study, and maybe a scenario or some sort of experiential learning model where people can kind of put the language to practice and put some of these skills to practice in a safe space. And opportunities for peer learning too. So how things are working for One TAM or Redwood Rising, and what we can be able to copy back to our networks. And Doug promised he would jump in if I missed anything. So I think that covers most of what we talked about in our group, but if anyone else wants to chip in.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Becky. It's amazing how much ground your group covered in such a short amount of time, and really expanded our thinking from this morning, and represents the depth and breadth of knowledge within the group that's joined us here today. So just in the interest of moving forward, I know that Armando's just got a limited amount of time with us today, and I want to make sure we get to him here during the window that we have him. So I'm going to advance to group 2, which I think is Manny. You want to report out on your group's behalf?
Yeah, so I'll be brief, just to capture a few of the highlights. So the first thing that we talked about really was the importance of the building of self-awareness, and how critical that is to a lot of these, each of the elements of the cornerstone, since they're all weaved together, and really this idea of, being active listening and building sort of the openness to different ideas, and this concept of, within scientific organizations, how we're trained in a certain way, and how do you become more open. But just that aspect of humility, and just helping ideas just to help, how do we build that self-awareness? How do we support that? The second one was the importance of personal relationships and being open, and just the informal things that we can do to build relationships, eating together, having coffee together, doing activities together, that just creates more of a welcoming space for the different voices, but that is done with that intentionality of creating these authentic relationships. So there has to be some level of research or work into who you're working with, and how do you create something that's authentic and respectful and open. And then the third one was, how do you normalize these elements within the organizations or your groups? For example, how to creating tools that one can use. One of the things we were discussing was in meetings, some meetings, you start off with some of these discussion ideas around active listening or vulnerability or crucial conversations or certain aspects that then you sort of start normalizing that that's part of the way that you do work and you engage your sort of partners as to this is something we explore, but also you sort of capture these really incredible lessons and create really interesting dialogue. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more sort of here in my notebook, which I can't.
No, it's fantastic. These are such rich conversations, and I wish we had more time to spend time in breakouts and then discussing them. But I really appreciate how you summarize those top several points and really emphasize the empathy and the interconnectedness and the authenticity of relationships and how those facilitate collaboration and collaborative leadership. So thank you. Kellex, I think you're representing group 3, which is the creating a sense of belonging.
Yeah, so I didn't take any notes because my primary objective was to avoid having this role, but apparently everybody else in my group had the same end game. So here I am.
Nice.
We ended up really talking about some of the tensions, the inherent tensions and trade-offs in this collaborative work and trust building, such as the need that people have to feel productive, like they're getting work done, and the need that we have to create connection that can feel like it's not work. And so how to make a space that makes people feel like they're still advancing their work while also building connection. We talked about some of the trappings of niceness that if, in the sort of culture of people who do a lot of this work is a lot of making everybody feel good and that sort of thing. But the trust actually comes often out of conflict or difficult conversation or authentic conversation and courageous conversation, which we also talked a little bit about like what it means to bring your whole self we say bring your whole self, but then we've got a lot of not so subtle messages that your work should be selfless. How do we have this sort of binary expectation sometimes that you're either selfless or you're an egomaniac. So how do we actually create spaces for people to sign their canvas in this work while still being collaborative? And also we talked about, like not everything has to be a group project. Sometimes there's like some aspect it's iterative and some aspect of somebody having leadership and moving forward with something and something coming back. So we just kind of talked about those tensions and those trade-offs and how they all exist together, and that's kind of okay. Yakata asked me to share that that my experience being a New York Jew coming to California, is very hard for me. It continues to be that my experience here is that you have to make everybody feel good before you can be heard. And everything that I have to do out here to be perceived as professional was something that was patronizing and like offensive in New York. But the things that were like respecting people's time or being effective or efficient in New York are considered mean or unprofessional here. And so I find that to be sort of magnified in the nonprofiteer and environmental spaces. So she just asked me to share that experience as well.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Kellex. So much of this is based on our own experience and culture, and certainly it's different here in the Northern Rockies as well, and that really resonates. It sounds like you've got some affinity partners online too that can be really direct and efficient with you at different times. So those are your go-tos. And this whole idea of one of the things we're doing together is creating additional value, shared value, things we couldn't do on our own. But at some point, we need to share that value too and claim it in different ways. And so what does that look like? It's not about ego necessarily, but it is about claiming value at some point. And that's totally appropriate. And I think we need to do a better job naming that as something that's part of these processes. And Christy, baton cleanup for our group, Group 4, about facilitation and facilitating the collaborative process.
All right. Thanks to all the other groups. I just learned so much from your summaries. Such a great group of people, just like last week, and continuing to learn and grow. So we actually spent most of the meeting talking about our individual experiences with what a great meeting was, and just some things that I got out of that that I think are relevant to our work together. Laughter, actually in the whole meeting or in a great sidebar, the more glasses taking off or milk shooting out your nose kind of laughter, the better. Although no one, I just threw that milk part in there. No one specifically said that. Hard truths. So seeing a meeting where it's actually a diverse group with good tribal representation, and we're actually dealing with the legacy of racism and land removal and looking at potential to move forward, that can make a great meeting. Getting beyond goals and being goal driven to trusting the process and experiencing connection. The importance of place, of actually being in the place together to be inspired and create a vision. Mentoring magic, the opportunity to work with others. And then magic from conversation. So all the work that goes into setting up a good meeting and what can come out of that. And then Lisa did a great summary in the chat. We had some wonderful ideas about training, and I'll just quickly summarize those. Allison mentioned and got a lot of dittos on some kind of training in how to actually seed power within a meeting or a relationship, and even tailoring that to different audiences, those that may be more resistant to that message. Training in conflict wisdom, training in the 4 cornerstones, a la Amy Mickles, training in the 4 dimensions that came up in this meeting, training in targeted facilitation for land stewardship, training around governance models and process. People talked about getting to yes in facilitation and dealing with difficult personalities. And I'm sure I missed a few things, but that was the general gist.
That was awesome, Christy. And thank you all. You guys did an amazing job summarizing a ton of content in a very short amount of time. We're only 1 minute over, so kudos to you in terms of staying on task for our East Coast friends. For those of you who are offended by that, thanks so much for taking that extra minute to connect and really learn about each other. So with that, I do want to turn to our final speaker for today, who is going to share some thoughts with us about his role in California in wearing a number of hats. Most recently, Armando Quintero has been named the director of California Department of Parks and Recreation, which happened back in 2020. He is a beloved member of our collaborative leadership roundtable, and that was pre-director days. And so we're so fortunate to reconnect with him now. He's got a ton of experience that he brings as a parks professional in parks operation, outdoor education, equity and access, diversity and inclusion, hiring and retention, the full gamut of skill set and knowledge that you really want for someone in this role. And not only that, but he's just a really wonderful person who's brought so much to our collaborative leadership conversations around showing up, being real, bringing his full self, being authentic, and making deep connections with all of us. So Armando, we're delighted to have you here to close things out with us today.
Thank you so much, Sean, and thanks everybody. I think you all just handed me the hardest job I've had in a year. I've been sitting here thinking I would just like to channel the sensibilities, the words, the things you've all been saying this morning. You know, the collective is just so powerful, and I was looking at the chat as I was listening, and I only had to step away for 1/2 hour. And honestly, I have to tell you that that half hour was the opposite end of the spectrum in which we've been this morning. So I come to you sort of scrambled, but with a full spectrum, but that's what our lives are like. And looking at the chat, I was actually thinking this chat stream reads like a Buddhist tome or something. You know, it's just this wonderful stream of consciousness with very grounding thoughts and all these incredible words, you know, of trust, respect, vulnerability, passion. And, you know, one of the words that I kept thinking about in all of it was, frankly, love. And the permission that we can give ourselves, I think, to bring love to the work that we do. And, you know, in this role, sometimes I find that that's where I'm operating from. For a group, for an individual, for an idea. And it's really pretty astonishing. And I'll just say a couple of quick things. Oops, I didn't start my timer. But one of them was when moments after I found out that I'd been appointed as the director of state parks, my now boss said, "So what are you thinking?" And I said, "I have forgotten everything and I know nothing." That's where I am. And the response I got was, "That's perfect." And it's something that I think about every day, because who knows what we're going to encounter. And, I think some of the frustrations that we all have encountered is those moments when we and our colleagues bring their idea of what we're seeing to the table as if it's the truth. And so again, the things that you were saying about listening and trying to really sort of recreate ourselves as we work together on these projects is so fundamental. And recently, when I was putting together something for a message to park staff, I said, we are a team of ancestors and we're dreaming this future into being together. And that's how we need to think about our work. And actually, when I was crafting this message, I went out and videotaped elements of it at 4 different parks near my home, one to the east, one to the north, one to the west, and one to the south. And as I was doing that, it just dawned on me that what I was doing was literally walking through the compass rows of parks relative to my house. And it struck me that a couple things that I'll put together here, and it fits, I think, what we're talking about in terms of landscape scale networks, landscape scale thinking. The first bird I identified on my own was at a sewage treatment plant in a pond near my house next to a refinery. And that was totally magical for me. That was my entree into a lifetime of passion about the natural world. And so one of the questions that I think about every day as director of parks is, so how do we connect children in their homes to parks and to these places and to these landscape scales that we're talking about? How do we create a sense of belonging and responsibility that can be crafted from a home base? And I think something like an idea of a parks compass rose for children that they can type. I mean, imagine typing in your address and suddenly you see the world relative to your home, whether it's a playground or a city park or a state park or a national park, all relative to where your home sits. And I realized as I was doing this message that that's the world that we're operating in. And, it's not fair for me to repeat anything that all of you said today. It was really all so frankly delicious. And really, I thank every single one of you for that, for your words and for your thinking and for your work. I have to say, when I opened up the window this morning, I counted 35 of you who I think of as dear friends. And I just thought, man, when does this happen? And so, but I want more of it. I think that in our workplaces, in the places that we engage with our families, it is what we do. We continually build these communities. And so building these communities around landscape scale thinking and trust and cooperation and all of that really becomes an expression of what I think Yakuta was saying when she talked about having that meal where the food was in the center of the table and everybody reached in, gave each other space, and then you went home and practiced it at home. That simple idea really struck me. And so I'll finish with this because I know that I only got a minute or two here left. One of the things that was real surprising to me when I came into parks that I was completely unaware of, state parks, is that state parks manages a huge grants program that goes to communities outside of state parks. Since the year 2000, State Parks has distributed well over $2 billion for projects in communities that are things like building nature centers, buying land so you could have a nature trail, purchasing land for playgrounds, and all these things. Just this year, the combination of the grants program, the grants that we're going to be distributing is $450 million. And I'm looking at that, thinking about the work that you're doing, thinking about the work of connecting people to landscapes. And I really want to make sure that we focus in a way that truly connects communities with the world that is where they live, right? And that also allows kids and families to have the experiences of mental health and physical health, all those things that we've all been starved of during this COVID year. You know, I've said in the last months that suddenly this year we all found ourselves in lifeboats, you know, and we all know that public lands have become this refugia that everybody is streaming to. And these islands of parks are now overwhelmed with people. And we have a huge demand and a phenomenal opportunity. And what I think about now is, what are the programs that we're working with? How can we expand them to include them into regional thinking, like you have all been talking about? And what I'm also very interested in that connects to this work that we're doing is the 30 by 30 efforts. And I'm a part of the governor's group working on 30 by 30. And I'm starting to think about making sure that make sure that we're including a whole range of thinking, because we can't be just thinking about wilderness areas. You know, I was thinking that with state parks throughout the state, with many of them having native plant nurseries where they cultivate local native plants for regenerating and repairing landscapes. What if we expanded that to the areas beyond the parks and the regions where we are, where we can take other areas of land that we can actually influence to help sort of return the natural landscape that's needed for pollinators and all of the other creatures around us. It's just, and I'm sorry, I feel like I'm really just sort of scattered, but again, listening to all of you this morning, I don't think that there could be more important work done by communities of people than the work you are doing. The ideas of cooperation, of creating models for regions, and I'll finish with this. I really hope to see state parks being a major player in being a part of partnerships. And I'll just give you a big idea, and that is, imagine a partnership that creates a landscape scale network that goes from the crest of the Sierra through the snowfields, through the high forests, the granite basins, down through river valleys, to the foothills, through the communities, to the big rivers, and to groundwater basins. And if we could bring the public into that view of understanding, that view of experiencing, of knowing they can go swim in the river in summer, they can climb to those mountains if they wish, but be able to learn the connectedness on which we depend. I'll stop there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Armando. I think it's exactly where my mind was going as you were talking, was that we're interconnected and we're interdependent. And the more we can foster and support you as director of California State Parks and everyone on the screen in the role that they play, leading or coordinating or supporting their effort, their nonprofit, their agency. And then the more we think about how do we stitch those together to have collective impact at scale across regions, just so powerful to think about what those different intersections can look like if we're able to facilitate and advance them and really support each other in this work, that our individual success does add up to collective success when we can get there. So thanks so much for sharing those thoughts with us. I know you're incredibly busy and really do value the time that you spend with us.
Thank you. My goodness, all of you.
Well, good. Well, I see that we're rounding out the hour here. So just in closing, a couple of things with the collaborative leadership training program that we're calling Collaborating Well. We are going to take your feedback from today and revisit those dimensions as we build out our curriculum, and we'll have updates to share with you in the months ahead. One near-term thing to be on the lookout is that we did, in the last couple of months, write a series of articles on collaborative leadership and collaborating well that will be published in the Park Stewardship Forum. So we'll send that announcement out when it comes. And then the last thing I want to do, well, I want to thank everyone for today. This was fantastic. I couldn't ask more of everyone from the Collaborative Leadership Roundtable, the panelists, the speakers, all of you, for everything that you brought into the conversation today. It really built off of last week in surprising ways for me. I've just craved this kind of interaction and engagement and connection with others in this weird Zoom space, and you guys bring that. So thank you so much.